Welcome to the Art Bazaar, a podcast that chats with artists of all types to explore the depths of creativity. Brought to you by the Alternative Gallery. We'll be releasing new episodes every Wednesday with bonus episodes dropping randomly. If you like what you're hearing, you can support this podcast by going to thealternativegallery.com and clicking on the podcast tab. I'm your host, Brandon Wonder, creative director of the Alternative Gallery, a nonprofit arts organization in Allentown, PA, run through the efforts of dedicated volunteers. Today on Art Bazaar, we'll be chatting with Mark Melara, a writer from Los Angeles, California, who's written for shows like Superior Donuts, starring comedian Jermaine Fowler and the remarkable Judd Hirsch. Not keeping his writing to just television, Mark also co-wrote the video game Freedom Finger, which is available in all gaming consoles, and he's currently developing a Y2K-era video game into a TV series for a major studio. We have a great chat in store for you while we cover the art of cinema, writing, and of course the current double strike going down in Hollywood. Mark Melara, welcome to the Art Bazaar. Thanks so much for being here, buddy.
Of course, man. It's a long time coming, I feel like.
Yeah, we used to have so many great conversations together while working back in the film industry in the good old days in New York City. That's where we first met, working on some projects. What was it? I think the first one was Celebrity Ghost Stories, right? Yes,
the famed and Emmy-winning. Okay, I don't think they won an Emmy. Celebrity Ghost Stories, yes, and then they even had a couple offshoots, if you recall, Celebrity Close Calls. So really branching out on their brand.
Well, and I'm sure as anyone can put together who hasn't seen the show, Celebrity Ghost Stories, it's about celebrities telling their ghost stories or any kind of paranormal encounters.
Experience. Yes, encounters.
And it was, for me, it was the first time working in reality television. And prior to working on that show, someone had mentioned to me, like, oh, I'm about to work on another season of this show. I can't believe I signed up again. I told myself I wasn't going to do this. And I was like, what do you mean? It's television. You get to work on another season of TV? You're so lucky. How could you ever get burned out? Well, once you work on a reality TV show, you find out real quick how not glamorous and terrible it is. I mean, at the end of the day, it was just celebrities. It was interviews of celebrities telling their stories, and then we were filming the reenactments.
Yes. So we got if Vince Neil of Motley Crue told his story, he gets to tell it over an air-conditioned studio soundstage, in Los Angeles, and then we over in New York are on the 9th floor of a shitty abandoned hospital in Forest Hills, Queens, where they don't even give us heaters. I remember a couple of those days. And just, brutal.
We filmed at that hospital a lot.
But yeah, we had some good times though. And that's the thing is, like, you certainly like can look back and say, oof, those were tough times. You didn't make very much money. You were abused to some extent, but you do remember fondly the truck rides and smoking a joint as you're waiting for, getting the call
takes.
In between, but even like in between, okay, we're starting this location, then we're going to drive over to this cemetery. And it's like, we would often have to sit around while the rest of the crew gathered and stuff. And so like, oh, fuck it. Like we're just the dirt bag.
The final
art
product was not great, but the time we had making it, we turned it into an absolute blast. I remember when I first came on, I was just a production assistant. You were working in the art department already. You had already been on the show. And you and I hit it off really quickly just because of our interests. I think the thing that really made us realize we were going to click was our fondness for Carlos Castaneda and Don Juan, the Little Smoke. And then we started talking about a lot of like ancient civilizations and just cultural things that most people wouldn't really have an interest in. And I mean, we got to go to some really cool places. The hospital being one of them. We got to work with some cool people. But I think, we got burnt out pretty quick on that show. And
if you recall, we had a very infamous mutiny.
Yeah.
Which I to this day, I tell that story to people because it's a good sort of microcosm of what happens in the business when you, especially, for those of us who worked our way up, and you start on the lower rungs, you just think like, well, this is normal, and I guess I just gotta eat this shit sandwich. Yeah.
Yeah, you're talking about the one that I accidentally started.
Yeah, well, basically, I'll tell the tale here. Let me spin our not celebrity ghost story, but more of
A real life horror story.
Yes. So basically, they were having a shootout in, like, I think it was the Jersey Shore or like South Jersey. And mind you, most of us lived in New York City, parked our trucks and things, in Manhattan or wherever we were living. And they just did not have any sense of how many hours we were out there. Because if you finish and you wrapped, say, 9 p.m., 10 p.m., and you're in South Jersey, you're not getting home till like 1 maybe, and then the next call for the following morning is at like 8 a.m. in Pennsylvania, and so that was really the straw that broke the camel's back, because we all realized this is dangerous to be on no sleep driving trucks across state borders, and it just got to be too much. And so you wrote a fateful email, sort of copying everyone on the crew, creators of the show, people from A&E Network.
A reply all, yeah.
A reply all, and it was eloquently stated, and you explained that, that this was sort of unsafe, and et cetera, and then that you would stand for it. And then the response from, I believe, forget her name, but she was the wife of the creator, producer of the show as well. And, I don't think she meant to say it this way, but that's just the way it came out from the boss, meaning she said something to the effect of like, well, thanks for letting us know, but just for the future, let us know if you're feeling burnt out or whatever the case is. We can always get somebody else to come in. And it was like, that felt very callous. And when I first read it, because it was like, oh, so we'll burn you out, destroy you, and then just replace you.
Yeah, exactly.
Whenever you can't. And it was like, it seemed very sort of callous. So then a string of other folks, including myself, responded to that. And some people chimed in and weren't as articulate, but hey, that's the way it goes.
Yeah, so the way I remember, it was right at the end of the shoot. I think it was the very last day of this season, and we had been run ragged. I know you were driving the one production truck. I, at the time, was driving a 15-passenger vehicle, so I was actually responsible for going and picking up part of the crew. I had to pick up actors. I'm on no sleep, and I'm like, look, I can barely stay awake behind the wheel of this vehicle, and I am responsible not just for the well-being of myself, but other people, and in some cases, children. And you're having us, I remember there being times when I would drive back to Brooklyn, it would take me an hour or two to find a parking spot. And I got to be back at 7 a.m. Like, that's not easy, and it's not the way it should be run. And I remember being very, very angry, and I sent this email thinking nothing of it. It was like, they're not going to do anything. They're not going to listen to me. They're not going to take me serious. I sent the email, and I went to bed, and all I remember is waking up to a bunch of text messages of people thanking me. Because
that's amazing.
And I don't remember if I intentionally hit reply all or what I did. I don't remember it being my intention to do so. It just kind of worked out that way. And then the outcome was because everyone chimed in and agreed with me for the most part, there was an uprising against the production, and they canceled the last day and actually paid us all. And then they fired me and then rehired me for a day to take the van back, and then fired me again. Then I think they rehired us to do the inventory in the storage unit there over in Queens. And that was it. It was like, that was weird. And after that, I was kind of over the whole thing. I came here to follow my dreams of making films. That's what I wanted to do ever since I was a little kid. This is not what I intended to do. So between that and life back home kind of falling apart for my family, I had to come back to keep an eye on things. That's when I left New York. And not long after that, you went your way to L.A.
Yeah. That is true. I'll just add one thing to that. Because I was actually talking to my wife about this. New York used to be a place, you think of the New York of the 80s and even the 90s, grittier, of course, but it was a place where artists went to experiment, to meet other artists. I read John Lurie's book, History of Bones. I'm a really big fan of painting with John and fishing with John, and I've even chatted with him a bit on Twitter. His story of living down on the Lower East Side, it's that's what being an artist in a place like New York was supposed to be like, where he was friends with Basquiat, and you're sharing your music or your visual art, whatever it might be, and there were places to live that were cheap. That ceased to be the case around the time that we collectively decided to leave New York for greener pastures, LA for me and back home for you. It's sad because I think that New York, the old New York, and the films and things that came out of there, they're very special, but it's just hard to make it in a city that is essentially a playground for the finance industry. And it ceased to be a place where you could cut your teeth, because you literally would need to be like a trust fund kid to be able to afford to live without having to live in like outer some borough, Hoboken or somewhere where it takes you 3 hours to even get into the city. So it wasn't worth it. And and fortunately, heading to LA, I asked Brandon, I was like, do you want to join me on the road trip? And we had an excellent time.
You packed up your stuff and you moved from New York to Los Angeles. Yeah.
My wife at the time, she got accepted into this really cool program where she went to Cuba. She is Cuban, but it was this cool, it's called the Venceremos Brigade. And so she was off doing that.
That's when the embargo was still going on too, right?
Yes.
So it was really hard to get to Cuba.
It was, but she was able to go and had an incredible experience. So we couldn't move out to LA together at the time because she was heading off to do that. So, again, speaking of the safety of driving and all that, it was made sense. And you were interested in going on the road trip. So we did that. And you brought your drum.
Mm-hmm. The djembe.
Yeah. And we listened to, Red Dead Redemption soundtrack.
That was great.
Chatted about all things Don Juan and Castaneda, and obviously had our cannabis for the road. And, we had a great time. So yes, that was sort of for me, it was actually the second time in Los Angeles. I was there for about a year in 2008 before the economy collapsed after that first writer's strike, actually. And so LA became my new home. I fortunately didn't have to start back at the bottom because I had established some good connections at my first time out in LA as a PA. And so when I came back, I was able to jump up to a writer's PA job.
Yeah, the road trip was really amazing. I remember the way we planned it. We would camp out one night. We would alternate. One night camp out. The other night we would stay in a hotel. We went to Nashville, Tennessee. We camped out in the Ozark Mountains.
Oh, boy. Man, the bugs in Arkansas.
Yeah, they were wild. Prehistoric. I remember I went to just take a piss in the middle of the night, and these things are chasing me. I'm literally running from them, and they're right there with me. I'm like, how is this even a thing?
Yeah, when those bugs smack you in the head in the middle of the night, because you can't see them per se if you don't have your headlamp on, it feels like a small bird has hit you in the head.
Sedona was really amazing too. Just seeing the earth, the red earth and Painted Desert, I think was a standout for me. We stayed in Vegas, which I wasn't crazy about Vegas. Everything felt too artificial to me. They didn't feel like there was a real culture to me. I always say to people, in my opinion, at least where I've been so far, New Orleans is the height of American culture in the United States, and Las Vegas is on the other end of the spectrum.
Yes. I feel like Vegas, you have to... Another character that we bonded over was Hunter S. Thompson.
Hunter S. Thompson, one of my heroes.
Yes, and we were both pretty well read when it came to his work. And if you've read his treatise on, Vegas or Churchill Downs, once you kind of accept the extravagance and
the absurdity of it all.
Yeah, and so I would agree with you that places like New Orleans, there's a beating heart and a soul there that's very different from, and I, a lot of people like to give LA shit, as being kind of fake and plastic and whatever. And it's there are parts of that, but that's so crazy to say because LA is not just Hollywood. There are, millions upon millions of people who this has been their home forever. There's a lot of culture here, and the cuisine is unparalleled. So I think it's easy to pass off certain places like that. And I'm not sure if you've been up to the Pacific Northwest, but my wife and I have gone on a few trips up there, and we've really fallen in love with that vibe because it's reminiscent of the East Coast in terms of the temperate weather and these kind of pine forests and, just that whole...
Yeah, that's actually the next part of the country I really want to chip away at. I haven't been up
there. Oh, man, I think you're going to love it. It's really special.
Running the gallery the last 11 years has kept me kind of locked down here for a while, especially being so poor doing it. But, things are slowly changing. I'm getting a little bit further ahead as far as being able to have more time and more resources to go out and explore. It's a big focus for me moving forward. And I remember when we were driving to LA, we had more of a trip scheduled. We wanted to go up through Utah. I remember we had discussed stopping at the Church of Peyote, which at the time it wasn't really trendy yet, so there wasn't this massive waiting list like there is now. But actually, on the way out there, you had gotten a job.
Yeah, that's that. Yes, you're right. So I was like,
and we had to cut the trip a couple days short.
Yeah, and then you had to drive even faster to get there. But yeah, that was one of those rare occasions where, because of prior connections and stuff that I had made in 2008, the show got bumped up, and they're like, we need the writers' PA early, set up the office, et cetera, et cetera. It was on the Warner Brothers lot, so sadly we did have to cut a couple of those days out. It's rare that you can move to a new city and be employed upon arriving. So it was.
Yeah, you were super fortunate.
Yeah, so it was ultimately good. I think,
and also that was my first time on the West Coast and my first time in Los Angeles, and I'm glad that I had the experience of driving out there. For anyone that really wants to see the country, that's the way to do it. I mean, for us, the first couple of days weren't that exciting because the environment still looked the same, but once we started getting to like on the edge of the Great Plains, and it's an environment I had never seen in person, and just seeing the landscape slowly shift to the desert was like, seriously, travel-wise, aside from New Orleans, the most impactful thing I've ever experienced.
Wow.
So thank you for taking me on that. Like that experience was really special for me, seeing the painted desert, and the desert is calling me again. So I'm really trying to get back there. A friend of mine, actually, he was in the last podcast episode, Chris P. Jones. He loves Los Angeles. And on the last episode, we had talked about not just Bukowski, but also Hunter S. Thompson. So I'm really happy that you brought him up. We're hoping to take a trip out there in the spring. So maybe we could link up and have some fun and see the sights together, man. Have some fish tacos.
Hell yeah.
We had some damn good food while I was out there, man.
Yeah, well, I've found a place here on the west side. I'll give them a shout out. Brothers Cousins Tacos. They're just a little group on the street. Got their whole setup, and it is incredible. If you like tacos al pastor, that's one of my favorites.
Hell yeah.
There's some incredible food out here, and we'll certainly do it up.
Absolutely. So I'm curious, you're a writer. You work on different television shows, and you've played various roles in the industry. What attracted you to being a writer in the first place?
So very early on, I thought, like, well, what's my place going to be in the grand scheme? What am I going to offer? And so whatever I chose would ultimately provide meaning to my life. And so it was not an easy task to come up with whatever that would be. And so very early on, I was like, okay, well, I really like animals. I guess I could be like a veterinarian. I like pro wrestling. Maybe I could be a pro wrestler. And I did have like a ring I built in my garage and growing up. So in a little federation that I created, Small Town Wrestling, STW, baby. So, I had those aspirations because they felt aligned with my values, or at least interests. But what ended up happening through the wrestling, I had like my own, sort of my version of the Fablemans, but I had like a camera, and I used to shoot our matches and our quote unquote pay-per-views. We only had really an audience of one, and it was the horse that my parents had in the barn. So I started really getting into the writing and the scripting of these sort of episodes, or the pay-per-views that we were putting on. And I realized pretty quickly, I was like, I think I really like the writing side of things. And I would rent, or in that era probably was discovering torrenting and such, would rent or get classic films. And so during that period, I watched like The French Connection and Justice for All, Dog Day Afternoon, and just, it was kind of odd, probably a lot of 70s stuff, to be quite honest.
That's a great era of films, though.
Truly. And it opened my eyes, and I was like, oh, there's a craft here that I'm drawn to. And so I think sort of the combination of like the world of pro wrestling and really more on the creative side of that, creating characters and sort of thinking about long-term feuds and rivalries and that sort of like side of their storytelling, combined with the craft of good film and cinema and finding the screenplays online and analyzing them. I think those were really my first forays into this world. And then I went to college, didn't really quite know my actual career path would be. Started out in political science, but eventually saw that the school at Syracuse had television, radio, film as a separate major. And I was like, well, I like television and radio sort of and film. So I took on that major, and it kind of helped pave the way for this career trajectory that I eventually went on.
And how did you get those first jobs as a writer, a writer's assistant?
My first one technically was with the WWE. So I was a senior year of college.
Very fitting.
Yes. The prior summer, I had opted not to do the typical, media internship or whatever that most of my fellow students were doing. And instead, I packed up my belongings and drove down to Louisville, Kentucky. Yes, Louisville. If you live there, you wouldn't say Louisville.
Home of Hunter S. Thompson, by the way.
That's correct. And Ohio Valley Wrestling, which is where I did wrestling training for about 3.5 months. Worked as a waiter over at a restaurant called Captain's Quarters on the Ohio River.
So you trained to be a wrestler, not a writer then, huh?
I did. I just wanted to get that experience in. So I did that for the summer. It was incredible because I was down there during the era in which CM Punk had yet to kind of be brought up to the main roster. And of course, as people might know, OVW was the breeding grounds for Shelton Benjamin and Brock Lesnar and Randy Orton and John Cena. They were all down there, I think about 5 or 6 years before I was there. Great experience. It also gave me additional thing to add to my resume. So when I applied to WWE my senior year, I could say, I've studied this in a way that maybe the average applicant hasn't. And I've done actual wrestling training, and I've set the ring up, and I've had a match. So I did that and got a job with Monday Night Raw. And so I went on the road with them on the creative team. And it was a crazy time because it happened to be what I maybe not affectionately call, but what I deemed to be the summer of Benoit, because it was that horrible tragedy took place. I think my second week, I think my first week I was there on the road.
Wow.
And I actually recall, I think I shook Chris's hand before he went out through gorilla position and went out to his match. And then the following week, that whole thing went down. So it was a wild time. But again, incredible experiences. We did a West Coast tour. So we were out here for, I think, about 11 days. We did Fresno, LA, Vegas, Prescott, Arizona. We did a big loop. And I realized I was I think I'm better suited to maybe live out and pursue writing in Los Angeles. So I eventually quit that company and moved out here. Of course, I had to wait out the writer's strike of 2007 into 2008. And so I came out in the spring of 2008. And that's really when I had to kind of utilize a different set of skills, which is cold calling, pounding the pavement, getting out there, meeting people. I was a seat filler for the TV Land Awards. I did all sorts of things just to meet people and be active in the larger world of entertainment. And eventually the cold calling paid off, and I got a PA job on The New Adventures of Old Christine, which was pretty awesome because I'm a huge Seinfeld fan, and I get to work with the incomparable Julia Louis-Dreyfus, which is huge. And she was so cool and incredibly professional. We only had a handful of interactions, but watching her process and seeing how she was on set, I was like, oh, that's a professional. Because she was extremely friendly and cordial, but at the same time you could tell she was in her head working lines and focused on her job. And I was like, that's really the way to do it. You're not a dick, but you are a professional and you do your job. And so therefore every day, she knew her lines. And so we were able to get out of work at a reasonable hour. It wasn't people scrambling to remember and do their job. So learned a lot and then just continued. And that's what often happens is you get your first couple jobs, and usually through those contacts, you get subsequent jobs. And so that's kind of how that worked. Because when I moved back to LA after our road trip, that production team needed a writer's PA. And so I just jumped on the next show, essentially, and then worked my way up from that to a writer's assistant, did a couple pilots, then was a continued writer's assistant, and then eventually script coordinator, and then eventually landed on Superior Donuts, where I got my first scripts.
Yeah, talk about that. What was that experience like?
I forget this writer who said this once at my WGA orientation, but he said something to the effect of, it takes 10 years from individuals you meet for that particular contact to pay off. Now, it could come at 6 years, it could come at 8 years. but usually takes up to about 10 years for certain people in your network for that connection to somehow lead to another thing. And it's so true, because in 2008, when I worked on New Adventures of Old Christine, I met some of my good, and continue to this day, some of my best friends, one of which is Aaron Vaccaro, successful writer, been on a bunch of different shows and stuff. And he's actually a captain over at the Sony lot for the strike. I've known him almost as long as my wife. Around that time in 2016, he was previously a writer on Mike and Molly, but that show got canceled, or they brought over the 2.5 Men writers, and so that show sort of switched out their writing team. And so he was looking for work, and he became script coordinator on Superior Donuts, which was at that time just had been picked up for, I think, 13 episodes per season, which is a shorter order, not a full order. And he was like, dude, they're going to need a writer's assistant, and I'm going to put you up for it. Would you want to come in here? And I was like, at that point in my career, I was like, yes, thank God. Like, I'd love to work with friends and people. And from what I had heard, the showrunners were like pretty cool and not abusive and all that. So took that job. And again, that paid off, because that was 2016. And I had met Aaron in 2008. So got a job on there and got my first script that year, and then moved up to script coordinator the following year, got my second script. And then, eventually that allowed me to get in the WGA, and obviously the rest is history.
Nice. And I know in addition to working these jobs in writer's room for other productions, you actually attempted to get some of your own scripts produced. Can you talk about that and what some of those projects might have been?
Yeah, around that same time, again, another sort of fateful fellow PA kind of connection, when I was on a show called Partners, created by the creators of Will and Grace. I met my writing partner, Anton, on Partners. He was a night PA and I was a writer's PA. So we hit it off because, similar to you and I, where it was like, okay, we're fans of Seinfeld and Simpsons. We could quote anything from both shows and had similar sensibilities. So he had a family connection to Sam Register, who was really big in the world of, like, I think he created like Cartoon Network, and he's like the head of like WB Animation, and they were starting up a digital arm of WB. It's called Blue Ribbon Content. Now I think it's been folded into the larger WB kind of streaming world. They were looking for new stuff, and Anton was like, hey, I know you have a ton of ideas, and I don't know, would you want to like kind of put our minds together and bring in a bunch of stuff for them to look at? So we did, and that is actually what led to the kind of pitch materials, and I even made a poster for it, for a project called Surf Pope. It had been thrown around in a sketch group I was in previously. My friend Rob pitched out an early version of that, and it was so funny, and we were all laughing about the possibilities of such a thing, but we'd never actually put it to kind of a formalized structure. And in my head, I just couldn't help but think of kind of a Garth Marenghi style take on it, where it's kind of almost like a found footage, like the 1970s sort of ridiculous kind of Batman the series level absurd humor and surrealistic at times. And so we created the show Surf Pope and brought that in, and they were big fans of it, and they asked us to develop it more. And so we developed it more. Eventually it landed on the desk of Peter Principato, who runs Artists First. He was a fan, but of course we didn't have any other producers or anybody on board. The dictum was like, hey, if you can get other people on board, we would be willing to take this out. Now at that point I didn't have managers or anything, so I was like, all right, well, let me pound the pavement. Let me see what I can do. I've done this before. And at that time, I had just gotten off of a show that Conan O'Brien's company, Conoco, had produced. And I thought, you know what? This feels in the vein of Conan O'Brien's oeuvre, if you will. So sent it over to an executive that I've been now friends with for years. And he read it and he dug it and sent it up to the president there at the development, Conan's development, and they dug it. And so then I was able to go back to Principato and say, hey, we actually have somebody who was interested in producing this. And it was really my first official development of a project. And then we took it out to Adult Swim and kind of the burgeoning TBS world. So it was really cool. And, we didn't sell it, but it was my first experience trying to cast a project and thinking big, and it led to developing more projects with Anton. And since we've gone on to develop with a couple different companies, FX at one point, stuff with A&E, and then eventually here we are now working with, I can't really talk about it too much, but big project with a studio adapting an old video game into a series.
I remember when you were doing Surf Pope and we were talking and you told me, yeah, I got this concept called Surf Pope and Adult Swim might want to do it. And if I'm not mistaken, wasn't Matt Berry attached at one point?
Not attached, but I certainly photoshopped his face onto Surf Pope. And I was in contact with his agents. You know, that was the beautiful thing. I learned quickly that if you contact the agents in the UK, you know, I don't know if it's just the politeness factor or what, or, you know, the cultural thing, but they were so responsive and friendly, actually took the time to say, oh, thanks for sending us over. We'll try to get this to Matt. It looks really funny, blah, blah, blah. You know, you send those same messages to like reps and people in Los Angeles, and you're lucky if you get a response. So it was cool. And, you know, it's funny because, you know, that was like 2015 or so, well before What We Do in the Shadows. And I believed in Matt Berry because, you know, I was like a fan of Toast of London and Garth Marenghi's Dark Place. And I was like, IT Crowd. And I was like, Father. So I knew that he was going, like, it was just inevitable that he would blow up.
He's amazing. And an amazing musician on top of it.
Yeah, oh, I love his albums. Kill the Wolf. I mean, geez. So I really believed in an absurd project like that. And honestly, it could still happen. Like, I could see him if he's listening. But, you know,
Matt Berry, if you're listening, make Surf Pope.
Yes. But, you know, it's just having fun. And that's probably good advice for anyone who aspires to do this, is nothing's lost. I don't look back and go, oh man, I'm bummed Surf Pope never got made. It's like Surf Pope was a great experience to see what it's like to work with production entities, and then you kind of use those experiences on your next project and kind of know where the pitfalls are.
You had all these amazing experiences and, you know, a lot of lessons and stuff like that, which kind of built to where you are in your career now, and it's everything is kind of on hold now because of this double strike taking place in Hollywood.
Yes,
just real quick, for anyone that might not be fully up to date on the strike, back on May 2nd of this year, 2023, the Writers Guild of America officially went on strike, citing kind of unfair practices in the industry, lack of compensation from streaming, the threat of artificial intelligence. Things have changed greatly from network television to streaming, where writers' rooms have shrunk. And the episode orders are less, and now writers, which used to be employed, you know, 40 weeks out of the year, now they're lucky to get 10, 20 weeks because they're just blowing through these shows. What were some of the early experiences in the writer's strike? Like, you knew it was coming, right?
Yeah, I knew it was coming because, you know, oddly enough, it does go back, as I was discussing earlier, my first move to LA was halted because I was about to move out when I quit WWE, and I was like, all right, you know, LA is the place to be, I'm going. And then I was like getting ready, and then the writer's strike happened. And I was like, oh shit, like I should hold off and maybe make some money, and then I'll go back out there as soon as the writer's strike is over. Streaming was very much in its infancy, and so it's hard for anyone to kind of predict where the business was going to go. At the time, Netflix, and I think it was pretty much it, was deemed kind of like, that's just TV on the internet. It didn't hold the weight that obviously it does now, because you couldn't have really predicted, you know, how this would have all gone. So that was at the time referred to as new media. And then the new media rules and the minimums as far as compensation and things go, certain things were gained in that strike, but perhaps not, you know, again, how can you forecast where things were going to go? And so since then, you know, as streaming took off and various other companies got in the game, and that really did become within the last, you know, 5-10 years, like you know, certainly there still is linear television, but a lot of the big stuff that's out there comes from the world of streaming, and it's particularly Netflix. So once they took over, they're no longer new media. They are the media. You know, they're just a part of the ecosystem.
Yeah, they're dominant. Yeah.
Yeah.
So real quick, that the last strike you're referencing, the 2007 to 2008, That one lasted 100 days, and it was for compensation, including residuals for mostly that was focused on movies being distributed digitally.
Yes.
There weren't really contracts yet for streaming because back in 2007 and 2008, network television was still king. So everybody was still really focused on getting the residuals from there. And now here we are in 2023. We are now today, as of September 23rd, the recording of this podcast, we are on day 145 of the Writers Guild of America strike. And on day 72 of the Screen Actors Guild SAG-AFTRA strike, started on July 14th. Writers Guild, 11,500 television and film writers currently on strike, and SAG represents 160,000 members.
Yeah. Huge.
So, I mean, these are a lot of people that are out of work right now because, and they wouldn't do so if it weren't severely important. But I also want to talk about this real quick before we go into any specifics. I've pulled up all the past strikes in Hollywood, dating back to 1960, of which the Writers Guild struck for 153 days, which is currently the longest. Now, I know they're meeting yet again, both the Guild and studio executives today, to try to finalize a deal, but we are days away from being the longest strike in Hollywood history. And
yes,
the 1960 strike was about foreign and subsidiary rights on television and reruns. The 1973 writers' strike was about pay and benefits. The 1981 strike was the fast-growing home video and paid TV markets. 1988 was for residuals and television shows sold to foreign markets. 2007, 2008 for compensation and residuals on movies distributed digitally. Basically, my point is that this is the same fucking labor strike over and over and over again. It's the exact same strike. What happens is new mediums of entertainment are created, and then executives milk out every penny they seem to get from it and do not give a fair share until essentially they are forced to.
Yeah, and I think that is the case in many industries where it's just the nature of capitalism to some extent is the bosses have to be forced into providing fair pay. And in the case of, the old factory system is even safe conditions. It's like if they had never asked for it, we wouldn't have got the 40-hour work week. We wouldn't have got workplace safety regulations and such. So I think that is part of
to work.
Yeah, there you go. So that's a part of why labor action is necessary. People can say all they want. My hometown, it's kind of par for the course to be like, unions, because they just kind of drink the Kool-Aid, and it's easy to go, some of the unions are corrupt. It's like, well, yeah, there's corruption in every institution, in every organization on the planet, probably to some extent. But at the same time, the gains, it's so funny when they say that, because it's like, oh, do you not think that corporations and other institutions have their own form of corruption? So people have to realize that. I want to add something to you. You said a lot of actors and writers are out of work. Well, it's important to also mention that a lot of crew members are out of work. And it's a horrible situation in which others suffer because of seemingly, this is what gets bandied about in the comment sections on the Hollywood trade websites, is like, because of the actions of the WGA, people are at work. Well, not really. It's actually because of the actions of the companies that are prolonging the strike and deciding, well, maybe we can just kind of wait this out and see if we can kind of splinter the guild
and I think they underestimated what's happening here. There was, just to show you the disconnect, I remember, what was it? Pull up the article here. Back in the beginning of August, there was a Q2 earnings call from Warner Brothers Discovery, and they had the nerve to say that they had saved more than $100 million thanks to the strike. Just to show you the disconnect. This labor strike, it's not unique to just Hollywood. And now you can see United Auto Workers have now also gone on strike. If anything, this double strike, it speaks to a larger issue with corporate greed that, frankly, people are fed up with.
Yeah.
The cost of living is through the roof. Most people I know, they're struggling to make ends meet for the most basic of needs. Yet, you have corporations like Netflix. According to The Hollywood Reporter, in 2022, Netflix made $5.6 billion in profit. $5.6 billion. And now the studio's argument are for these requests from the Writers Guild and now the Screen Actors Guild in some regards as well. the studio's response is, we don't have the money to cover what you're asking for, when in reality, all that's being asked for is a percentage of the profits. So if there's no profit, there's nothing to be
which is
given to
crazy,
anybody.
because to save money in that regard, that's very short-sighted mentality. Because if
they got a lot of shit
and
for
it's
that.
like, if you were producing content and then making money from your sponsors, from advertisements, all this other stuff, as it would be in a normal year, without a strike,
Selling
you
your
would be
product.
making hand over fist. Like it's a very strange and short-sighted and kind of like spun.
It was obvious spin to their stock holders and people concerned with it. They're trying to put a positive spin on it.
I don't even think that could have worked. I feel like even the
and in this same phone call, they said they expected the strike to be over by early September. Well, we're nearly at the end of September here. That's not happening. And Fran Drescher, the president of SAG-AFTRA, she was just renominated in like a landslide vote, by the way. So that says that the guild is really supportive of what she's doing in her actions. She said about a month ago, I think it was on the Today Show, that they were prepared to strike for another 6 months.
Yeah.
Even though it's sounding really good right now, it sounds like it can go on for a lot longer. Where do you think things are right now as far as
I would break with some of my compatriots on the picket line yesterday that I chatted with, but I think that the last few days are quite promising, and I think there is a desire amongst the CEOs, given that they also joined the negotiations of the last few days, which was not the case through July and August and any other meetings that took place then. Either they're doing it because they actually have the sway and can affect the way the negotiations go, or they would like to kind of have their moment in the sun. Regardless, it's helpful. I think it's promising, and I'm hoping to hear good news today. But to go back to your comments about the pinch and the squeeze that everyone else is feeling, we had a hospitality union, which I joined a picket earlier in the summer. Various hotels were being picketed. And, I once worked at the Best Western in Watertown, New York during the summer between college. So I kind of felt a connection to these workers and wanted to go out there and support. So it has been a labor summer, especially with the auto workers, as you mentioned. And there's power in this collective action. And I think people need to remember that. So what we're seeing now is that squeeze and that pinch for so many people, because the companies actually got a huge injection of money during COVID. The fear of like, consumers are not out there. It's like, well, if there's one thing people were doing, it was consuming, buying stuff on Amazon and whatnot. So unfortunately, that led to, obviously now we're seeing inflation and high gas prices and food prices, and rents are going up, but wages are still fight constantly when people want to raise the minimum wage. So it's crazy. And I think, like you were saying, the strikes are kind of symptomatic of this outrage, and people are just fed up, and I think they're rightfully so.
I was doing some research to see how much wealth inequality we have right now and trying to gauge where we are. In 2021, the richest 1% gained $6.5 trillion. That's insane. I mean, this is so. Even after a deal is struck with the Writers Guild and the Screen Actors Guild, I think the bigger problem still isn't over. Everyone's interested in getting back to work, getting things going again. It's very, very important. But we still face this bigger issue in society of just this massive wealth inequality that is year after year making life more difficult to live by normal people. And I know artificial intelligence is a big part of this argument on both sides. And with artificial intelligence, there's also the other topic of automation. Everyone's seen these self-checkout kiosks in grocery stores and stores all over the place, right? And there's always that one person that is like going on about how that's going to destroy good paying jobs. When I hear this, I think to myself, I'm like, who wants to work that job? Isn't the point of technology to make our lives better? Right. Why are we fighting just to have these crappy jobs? And automation and technology, it's we already know, everyone across the board is pretty much agreeing that there are going to be less jobs, existing current jobs at least, because of automation, but population continues to grow. So we're going to get to a point, if we're not already there, where there are not going to be enough jobs for everyone.
Right.
So at that point, what do we do? You know, I spend a lot of time thinking about how people spend their free time. And this is why I like artists so much. What are artists doing with their free time? They're creating. They're making things. They don't have to do it. They're drawn to it. If the whole point of life is just to work and pay your bills and die, I mean, that's kind of a very grim outlook on what we are as beings, right? Like, I feel the point of technology is to make our lives better so we can spend time with our families, we can travel, we can create. And what we do in our free time, it's very, very, very important. And we have to kind of now start to shift the conversation in society about, okay, not everyone is going to be able to have a job just because of the nature of the beast here. What do we do from there? What do we do when not everyone is able to work? And now we see even people that have multiple jobs can't make ends meet. So, and we're seeing now that when the artists rise up, things get shut down. Yeah. You know, and it's making the artists look very, very essential, and the executives look very non-essential, because the executives are all still there working, but what are they making? They're not making anything. They're releasing stupid Q2 earnings statements about how they saved $100 million, which is totally absurd. So I'm very curious, what has it been like on the picket line? Like, I remember you telling me it was like the best networking you have ever done. Like, take me down there, because I'm really curious about the spirit of the people on these picket lines.
That is very true. And that was certainly not the intention of it, nor the reasoning, but it just was sort of this unexpected outcome, which was, you're on the picket line. We are in this together, you know, sort of unlike the COVID thing. We're all in this together, kind of. But in this case, we are. And you're out there, and maybe you have a name tag on, but it's not like this sort of detached connections that you might have had normally in the industry where, oh, you're going to meet with this person. Well, that person has time to look you up on IMDb and decide that you're unworthy of their time or attention. Whereas you're on the line, and these titles are dissolving in real time. It doesn't matter what somebody's...
Everyone feels more equal, you're saying.
Yeah, so you're there and you're chatting with somebody. Next thing you know, you're like, oh my God, this guy created Workaholics or whatever. It's just a great connection. Wow. And I think artists and writers, and now with the advent of actors joining, it's like all of that has increased it even more, to the point where you're like, we should be meeting one another more. This is what needs to be happening. It's funny how you're meeting people that you feel like you should have had already met. You know, like because of your interests or whatever. So that's been really great. And, you know, just connecting with people and hearing their stories and getting out there and, you know, that sort of competitive streak gets to kind of be put to the side for a moment.
I imagine there's this feeling of, I can change the world.
Yeah. And I think that for some of us that got into writing for those reasons, that you do feel that more. But I want to go back to something you said earlier about, because you the way you were saying it, I was like, what am I? I feel like I'm listening to Martin Sheen in Wall Street right now. If you recall that line where he tells Bud, his son, he's like, stop going for the easy buck and start producing something with your life. Create instead of living off the buying and selling of others. And I think that is what you were sort of getting at, of like, if you can, you know, technology can be this boon to human civilization where you don't need to work as many hours because certain things are taken care of, and so you have more time to you know, and you may not be this like Van Gogh level painter, but you have an interest in it and you'd like an extra 2 hours to paint, try some watercolor out or whatever, and there should be nothing stopping us. Instead, you feel like you need 2 jobs to make ends meet, and that's shitty.
Personally, that's one of the things I would like to see come out of this double strike here, which, first of all, that this is the first double strike in Hollywood since 1981. So this is the first double strike in our lifetime, which I find very significant. Again, I'm a big supporter of technology. I love it. It's all in how we utilize it. And what I would like to see come out of this strike is more understanding and support for artists. I mean, the Screen Actors Guild here, 86% of members of the Screen Actors Guild don't even make the $27,000 minimum required to receive health insurance. So 86% of actors don't even make enough to get health insurance. So these are struggling artists, starving artists. And, you know, I think a lot of it's the perception of art. in America at least. And this is a big thing that I try to do with my nonprofit organization, the Alternative Gallery, is I noticed early on, actually I even noticed this while working in New York City, that when we would do art events or when I would attend art events, it would really only be artists and art collectors. You wouldn't see a whole lot of normal people. And I'm like, why is that? And after talking to people over a number of years, I got this impression that people feel like if they're not an artist and an art collector, they have no reason to go to an art gallery. And I time after time see these same people are the ones that also don't go to museums, that kind of ignore culture and stay so narrowly focused on what's right in front of them. For some people that works, but I think now in America we have too many people doing that. Too many people not paying attention to art and culture. It's had a huge impact on the arts. We need people to understand how significant the arts are. You know, what these artists are doing by getting up there and acting, I mean, that's not something that just anyone can do. And for them to barely live above the poverty line is unacceptable.
I think for some people, it's like they just assume, well, you're an actor in Hollywood, you must make enough money to live. It's like, well, they don't understand that the cost of living is higher here. Like, there are many other factors here. And the fact of the matter is, you know, like you said, these folks are compelled to do that as a living. So they're willing to sacrifice, I guess, like a quote unquote normal existence to pursue this art. And that's commendable. And I'm not really sure why we would ever want to question that and, you know, sort of consider them to be asking for too much or greedy or whatever. It's like, it's just so crazy. But, you know, back to your other comment too, you know, if you think about the pandemic, we had a kind of pilot version of a universal basic income. And if you talk to, I'm not sure, you know, how folks felt where you're from, but I know in my sphere, it was like, people were like, I miss the pandemic. Not because of the, you know, dangerous infectious disease going around, more so the sense of like you had a certain amount of money coming in. It was well over the normal amount of unemployment or whatever, and you could kind of breathe for once. And so I felt like that was a good pilot program for universal basic income, and it doesn't even have to be that much.
No, Andrew Yang was a big proponent of that when he was running for the Democratic nomination in 2020. Mm-hmm. And, you know, props to him for making that, you know, kind of a more of a mainstream issue, because what he was proposing was basically every citizen in the United States gets $2,000 of universal basic income, enough for you to survive, but not enough for you to just be a mooch, right? And I think what happened here, you mentioned like how people thought about, you know, the stimulus and things like that from the pandemic. I think what happens so often is people want to they want to point to the abusers and they want to make them the poster child for why that thing won't work. I mean, yes, okay, in my area, there were a bunch of idiots that used it to buy fireworks, and it's where the dirt bike issue became a huge thing here, because you had a lot of people living in a house together, they're all getting money, and there are a bunch of fucking man children that just want to go out and be idiots. So yes, there were problems, but I don't look at those dirt bikers as the poster child of why universal basic income may or may not work. And it's not you have to police these issues. You should make a society that doesn't want you to spend your money like that doesn't want you to go around and try to piss people off by riding a dirt bike on their sidewalks. Like, these are not the way we need to handle these conversations. So, you know, another big issue that is going on in this double strike is artificial intelligence. And I mean, artificial intelligence is going to completely reshape our world, no matter where you are, what industry you work in, it doesn't matter. Everything is about to change. And I know the writers, one of their main issues is that they don't want their scripts used for language and machine learning with the ability to spit out scripts. Is that correct?
Yes.
One of the main concerns.
The issue, and you know, if you were to dial back to earlier this year, I don't think it was on the top of the list as far as a major issue, but it became a major issue because ChatGPT, you know, blew up. Well, you could tell because all these companies, Google and Microsoft, all these companies were, you know, pumping money into it. And even like Warner Brothers and these companies putting out job positions for people to train AI and stuff. So as far as the writers are concerned, we simply don't want the position of screenwriter to be devalued because the companies can just say, well, we had the chatbot put together the early stages of developing this screenplay or this TV series. So we just need you to come in and punch it up and kind of add a little human flavor to it, right? And then that just feels so wrong to allow that to be the early stage, because then you know that like they're not going to pay you for that polish or punch up to that material in the same way as if you were to be the one, you know, using it from the ground up. And the fact of the matter is like I've tried to use ChatGPT for those sorts of things, and at times it's more work because you're constantly having to like retrain it, tell it, no, actually I meant in terms of this context. No, actually I'm talking about, you know, not a human being that I'm saying this to, but rather if it was a character saying this to another character. Like it doesn't understand, you know, the realm of art. And even if I even asked early on, I asked ChatGPT, do you feel as if AI should replace artists? And it unequivocally said no. It said AI does not have the capacity for human emotions and human experience, and therefore
currently
you will currently, yeah. But I mean, I think in any capacity, it's going to ultimately be like replication or mimicry than it is actual, whatever that sort of ineffable quality of being a human being, what that gives us. If it's sort of a, you know, we can get into the occultist notions here or whatever, but like that, the soul, the spirit,
Sure.
the igniting spark of our being.
Well, and the thing is, like, if left to its own accord, AI likely never would have dreamt up art because it's not a necessity of living or survival. So it probably, as far as like a mathematical algorithm, it probably doesn't even make sense to AI what art is. And yes, it's very much replicating it, but I mean, even the creators of ChatGPT and OpenAI, they admit they don't really know what they have or where it's going.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I hear these almost like defenders or naysayers of like, oh, well, all ChatGPT is going to do is spit out some script and it's going to be dumb. It's not going to be funny. It's like, okay, yes, but that's what we have now. This is in its infancy.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine a few years from now. You know, so for anyone that's saying that those concerned with AI and its impact or art are just being paranoid or alarmist, my response to those people is that this technology is in its earliest stages of infancy.
No, which is why the strike getting very precise language
Very, very
about
precise,
that
yes.
now, it is important. And I agree with you. Like, I don't think that is the right mentality, because it certainly can evolve. And I think rightfully on the other side, because you do hear from the other folks being like, oh, get over it. It's coming regardless. It's going to take over your job. Just accept the inevitable. And I think that that's a kind of short-sighted mentality as well. So don't listen to those people. Don't listen to the quasi-nihilistic tech bro. They're not thinking in the long term.
They're thinking of commodities, and that's not how I analyze life. Like, I'm a terrible capitalist because I'm not motivated by money.
Me too.
I'm not motivated by money. People want to talk about money. I'm more curious, what cartoons do you like? What's your favorite Godzilla movie? Like, that's the kind of stuff I want to talk about. I think for the Screen Actors Guild, the AI is an even bigger issue for them, because we already know that studios, they want to have the likeness of certain actors in perpetuity forever. And it's an easy agreement that no one should be able to own your likeness forever, right?
Oh, no. When that came out, like what was in some of these contracts for certain background actors and people, I mean, that's unconscionable. And I think everyone should see that.
It's now no longer a concern we have to worry about. Someone's likeness has already been stolen. Stephen Fry, the actor from the Harry Potter movies. Did you hear about this?
I saw that, yeah.
Where his voice, they took his voice from the films and they had him read, I believe it was one of the Harry Potter books, and he had no idea what was happening. They used his voice to read this Harry Potter book without his knowledge, and him and his agents are freaking out. And this is the beginning of it. This is the absolute beginning of it. And we know so much of this AI, it's trained on stolen art, stolen literature, even medical records. I mean, there's a group of 17 major writers are suing OpenAI for massive copyright infringement.
Yeah, so George R. R. Martin was involved.
Yes, he was. I'm one of those people. I'm terrified of AI because it's so unknown to me, and I feel like it has too quickly the ability to surpass what human capability is, and it needs to be kept in check. And in addition to that, AI has no right to be anywhere near art. art is a human expression. We don't even know why we create art a lot of times. And that's okay. Maybe it's not something we should figure out. It needs to be highly regulated. I mean, I think like something in the medical field, identifying, early detection for cancer and disease, I think is amazing. Let's use AI where it needs to be used, not to make you more money in your fucking studio in Hollywood. That's totally absurd that you would build this industry. Like, okay, I saw this little comic 2 years ago, right? It was like this businessman, post-apocalyptic scenario. He's around a campfire with another survivor, sitting there in ratted, like all torn up clothes with his tie. He's like, yeah, we might have destroyed the world, but for a moment in time, we made a lot of profit for our stockholders. And I feel like this is the path we're on. Like, people really don't care if these decisions destroy the world in the future as long as they can make money today. Yeah. So do you have any other thoughts on the writer's strike overall? Like, what happens if this deal breaks down? What do you think is next?
Well, if these current talks break down, unfortunately, I do think that both sides tend to kind of go back to their corners, and it will take a bit of time then to return to the table. So that would mean pushing an end date further into the fall, which of course, we know would push a SAG resolution then further into the winter, potentially even the top of the year. I guess I don't have much to say other than it's just really unfortunate to not just, us writers and actors who are out of work, but really just all the crew and everyone else who has to sit idly by waiting for the companies to realize at some point that the money they're losing simply could be less if they just made the deal now. That's the crazy thing about all this, is like hiring PR teams and all this extra stuff. It's like if they had just kind of come to the realization earlier that this was not unlike a normal negotiation. And that's going to happen and that's every industry, is that every negotiation isn't like incremental changes. We're dealing with massive inflation as of late, finally having to kind of re-examine what new media means and residuals and things like that. It was bound to happen, and both sides knew that, but it's just that the WGA was ready this time. Something the WGA did was look at the astronomical profit that these companies have been experiencing the last few years and saying, if there was a time for us to kind of balance the scales a bit, it's now. Look at, you guys are making this much money, whereas in previous negotiations, the companies could they had a little wiggle room to say, well, it's kind of a tough time for us to negotiate on these factors because our numbers are down. But that's just simply objectively isn't the case now. So it had to happen sooner than later. I'm glad that it did, because I think we'll all be better off for it. If less mini rooms take place, then that means that there are more jobs and jobs that have longer terms for not just writers, but for production workers, for crew, because oftentimes the pre-production longer,
Well, and very quickly, just describe what a mini room is to anyone listening.
A mini room is defined in a couple different ways. One of which is before a show is even greenlit, they start a room in which less than a typical amount of writers per writer's room, so it might be like 8 or less, would meet for a much shorter term as well. It might even only be like 4 or 6 weeks, could be maybe 8 weeks at most, and they will break stories and come up with maybe outlines. Sometimes they even have them write full episodes, and then essentially that material is then weighed as or kind of scrutinized, and they decide whether they want to buy the show. So that's one version of a mini room. Another version of a mini room is a shorter order, less workers in a room, and they write the entire show in, say 10 weeks or less. And then all of those writers, except for the showrunner, their employment is ended. And then the show is then produced, whereas you then have no writers going to set except for the showrunner. And it just kind of cheapens the writer to producer pipeline. So that's why they're concerned that you can't really train your showrunners of tomorrow if they are detached from the production of their own episodes.
And this is where I think convenience is killing us. Like, we have now gotten used to these streaming sites, and we love that we can have access to all this stuff at, the drop of a hat. But what are we losing in the process? We now no longer call these, documentaries and television shows and movies, it's just loosely called content. Every streamer wants content. They don't really care what it is. They don't even care if it does well. They just need to fill a void until they can fill the next void. And it's impacting art. So basically, in our pursuit of creating more content, we're having studios that are having, like I said earlier, smaller episode orders, shorter times to write those episodes, and less writers in a room. So it's like you said, we're setting ourselves up for failure in the future because these environments where these new showrunners and creators would learn, they don't have that atmosphere anymore. Kind of as a final thought, do you have any advice you would give to anyone that's an aspiring writer?
I will say this, the business has changed and it keeps changing since I've got into the business. I think it's probably changed like 5 times, which means the path to where you want to get to is altered. And so I think it's important when you get in to have a sense of the kind of career you want or the path that you want. It's really hard these days to come in and be kind of agnostic, like, oh, maybe I'll be a producer. Oh, maybe I'll be an editor. It's like, it's better to have some sense of it. That way you can kind of like target the direction you're going. And I think it's about building a network and relying on those individuals and fostering that and not just kind of expecting people to reach out to you. You have to be proactive as you seek future job and get out there and meet people. That Tina Fey piece of advice is good, which is say yes. Go to the event. You're tired. Okay, you don't want to go. Well, you don't know who you're going to meet. Same thing goes with picketing. I know there are plenty of people who didn't or maybe couldn't get out to picket, and it's unfortunate because I think it was a great time to meet your fellow writers and develop more connections. So yeah, as far as the greater industry, I think it's always changing. So you have to be on your toes. My writing partner actually is putting out a book. When that comes out, I'll let you know. And I think that would be a great resource for people who really, and he does it in a very funny way too. It's written well.
Yeah, I'd love to share that.
Would be it'd be a great resource for people because he really pulls no punches either. He's not giving this kind of rosy picture because I think you do have to be aware of the sacrifices and how long it might take because, not all of us are connected, right? So it takes a little longer when you don't have those connections.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to chat about all things art, cinema, and what's going on here with the double strike.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And thank you for being out there on the picket line. Really appreciate that. And my sympathy and support goes out to you and everyone else fighting this good fight. I'm behind you 100%, and I can't wait to see what you do in the future, man.
Thank you, dude. Yeah, I think good things are coming. So I'm really excited about our project, Adapting the Game. I think that'll be a super fun show. It's actually got a lot of prescient themes that we've discussed here in this talk, too, regarding AI and the imbalance in our society. So hopefully we're able to make it. But thank you for giving a voice to art lovers, worldwide.
Thank you, man. We'll have to bring you back on once things are rolling normally again and talk about your big projects you got going on.
That'd be awesome.
Hey, man, thanks so much for visiting the Art Bazaar. We'll talk soon.
Okay, sounds good, dude.
And I have a major update regarding this episode. As Mark and I had discussed, the Writers Guild of America was close to reaching a deal with Hollywood studios to end the writer strike. On Sunday, September 24th, the WGA and AMPTP reached an agreement on the issues at hand, and on September 26th, after 148 days, making it the second longest writer strike in Hollywood history, the negotiation committee for WGA unanimously voted to approve the agreement, bringing over 11,000 writers back to work. With this new agreement, the WGA secured nearly everything they were asking for, including wage increases, streaming residuals, staffing minimums, that's the mini rooms Mark was talking about, and strong guidelines for use of AI in the writing process, stating AI cannot write or rewrite literary material, and AI-generated material cannot be used to undermine a writer's credit or separate rights. Overall, this is a massive win for the WGA, and we can only hope a similar deal will soon be reached for SAG-AFTRA, also bringing over 160,000 members of that union back to work. And as Mark pointed out, it would also be bringing back the countless crew members waiting for these strikes to reach a resolution. I have faith they'll do just that. A huge thank you to everyone who helped make this happen. You not only protected the rights of artists, but you made it much more possible for people to survive by being an artist. This episode of Art Bazaar is dedicated to all of you who helped make this happen. Thank you for everything you've done. And thank you, Mark, for making this such a memorable episode of Art Bazaar. I'll see you soon.